Welcome to Policy on Demand. I'm Sindhu Blume. With all the back and forth on tariffs shaking up the markets and company planning, there was a lot to sort through. For that reason, I'm so pleased to be joined by Desmond. Chris, thanks so much for being here.
Always a pleasure, Sindhu.
And before we get started, I want to offer up a news happens disclaimer. We are filming at 3:30 p.m. on Tuesday, March 11th, and things may have changed by the time you watch this episode. And to that point, Chris, just this morning, tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum went from 25% to 50%, and this is just an announcement. And that announcement caused Ontario to walk back the energy imports tariffs they were going to impose. So, with all this back and forth, what strategies are companies employing to deal with tariff uncertainty?
Companies are really just like us, having a hard time keeping up, Sindhu. And when you have a situation like that, you have to find where you're going to ground things and where your true north is going to be. And it's going to be something that's going to be changing from week to week, month to month. We have a lot of things happening, but I think it gets down to making sure one, you have some really good dynamic models with great source data, one that actually incorporates your customs data combined with ERP, but then incorporating the what ifs. With companies going through and looking at not only their own data and what can happen by country, but also what the industry data is looking like. And then the third piece is developing playbooks to respond to what actually happens. Because the one good thing about this, if there is any, is that when tariffs are typically announced, there is a period before they go into effect. And if you're able to plan around that and have a leg up with what your plays are going to be, that's what we're seeing a lot of companies do.
All right, so after the first delay of tariffs on Canadian and Mexican products, I had spoken to one of your colleagues, and she said to me, the main thing that people are concerned about are tariffs related to Canada and Mexico. So right now, a bunch of things are in play, and I want to get a sense from you where the pain points are for Canada and Mexico, for China, and then eventually the rest of the world. So if you could touch on that, that would be great.
Yeah, so we have had increases already with China. I mean, China is what the original administration had for the original tariffs, and those just have increased not only under Trump's original administration, but also under Biden. And now we've seen those ramp up even more, especially to blanket the rest of the goods that previously were not tariffed, and they've gone up from 10% to 20%. The way I look at it from a China perspective is that those tariffs are probably going to be longer term. Whereas when we look at what's happening in the back and forth with Mexico and Canada, we're probably going to see those tariffs of some sort actually go into effect again. I imagine it's going to be around when the investigations are done for the American First trade policy combined with the fair and reciprocal plan. And we'll see what those tariffs are for Mexico and Canada around that time of April 1st, April 2nd. But then the big piece is the rest of the world. And that's the part where I feel like a lot of people are not as focused on because it's still unknown of what that means. But we've done an analysis that we're releasing some insights on later this week that's going to talk about reciprocal tariffs and what the ranges could be. So if you think about it, before the inauguration, 20% was what rumored to be. Now we might be actually dealing with the larger ranges and bigger rates, including what the VAT impact could be. So we're seeing the impact for many countries being as high as 40, 50%, depending upon product group. To me, that needs to be a strategy a company employs is looking at the potential reciprocal tariffs that might happen in place. And we might find out about those as early as April 2nd.
Okay, and I want to ask you a crystal ball question. I know
Uh-oh.
I heard yours is in the shop, but where does this all go from here, and how does it shake out?
When we're talking with companies, we just look at what are the cards that are played that we know of. We know of what's already been played related to China, and the question then becomes where are we going to go from Canada and Mexico combined with the rest of the world? And two big pieces that we have to deal with are the American First trade policy, and that's a focus on all free trade agreements, but also deficit countries. So when I do an analysis, I look at what are the key deficit countries a company is potentially operating within that has a higher likelihood of tariffs. The second piece is going to be what does the potential reciprocal tariffs look like for the fair and reciprocal plan? And that also produces another list of a set of countries that have a higher likelihood of having targeted or surgical tariffs. When you take those two lists and combine them, you even have a richer data set that can be used to say, okay, what's the probability that I might have tariffs in the following 5 locations that I import from? What is that going to look like? And that's going to be the plan that companies will tend to focus on, of making sure they have playbooks for those areas. And at the same time, Sindhu, the part that we haven't talked about is all the retaliatory tariffs. And that
Right.
is going to be happening in the crystal ball that I just got back from the shop. And what it did say to me when I saw it, it said, beware of the retaliatory tariffs that come later on.
All right. And my final question to you, which I'm going to add another layer in there, also involving crystal ball. So let's talk about next steps for companies, and you can get as granular as you want to, but I'd like to layer in there. This is a lot of unknown uncertainty coming at companies, right? So, how are they keeping a calm, structured environment? Because you have to do that. So, how is all that working?
It's all over the board. I had a call this morning with a client, and they find themselves arguing within their own company on what's going to be real and not, and debating upon, oh, that can't happen. There's no way we can plan for that. There are some companies that have that sort of, questioning of what's going to happen, but unfortunately, most companies, especially given your supply chain, don't have optionality to just assume that things may not happen. You have to prepare your data to help you understand the what if scenarios. And part of the best recommendations, Sindhu, I have is, however you're setting up your trade and tariff impact team, make sure it's not just one team that's in purchasing or logistics or ops. It needs to be cross-functional to include the areas of customs, tax, transfer pricing, because this holistic impact is going to be what's going to be needed for any company to evaluate what the plays will be. Having good data is going to be a big piece of that, because I'm also seeing that a lot of companies, they'll run the initial analysis, and then we'll come in and run an analysis too using customs data. And they, not quite apples and oranges, but there are huge differences. And you need to reconcile those, because if by chance the data pulls are not lining up properly and you're off by 20, 40, 50% of your estimates, that's a material impact when we're talking about, 10, 25, 50% tariff rates.
Right, right. Chris, thank you so much. I know we're going to have a lot more to talk about. And I just want to mention you had brought up insights. Tomorrow, March 12th, you are going to be on a PwC webcast. I believe it's called the accounting webcast. And so we will have all that information in the description of this episode. But thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Sindhu.
And we appreciate you spending this time with us. And stay with Policy on Demand, because there's a lot more to come from Washington, from tax to tariffs. Take care.